Well, here we are again today talking about how we build a Canadian house. Welcome, Johnny. Glad to have you here with us again today. And today we're going to talk about the wood structure of a Canadian house.
Okay, you build this house from wood. Why you choose wood? Why Canadians choose wood to build a house?
Good question, Johnny. You know what? After building houses now for 200 years, we've used every kind of material from bricks to concrete to steel to wood. And when it comes to the most ecological, most comfortable house, most resistant house in terms of resistant to earthquakes and so on and wind, we have found that there's nothing like the natural material of wood to build a house.
Așadar, vorbim despre construirea pereților exteriori și a acoperișului. Structura din lemn este în acest caz elementul care nu poate lipsi pentru că vorbim despre o casă canadiană Super E, care se bazează pe 3 caracteristici fundamentale. Este eficientă ca preț, eficientă din punct de vedere energetic și, în plus, ecologică.
Could you tell me why you bring the wood from Canada and don't you use wood from Romania?
Good question. Because our house is a system, we call it the Canadian housing system. So engineers, in order to design any kind of a structure, must know the strength of each component, each piece of the structure. In other words, if you were designing a concrete structure and we had no idea how strong your concrete blocks were, we would have no idea how big to make them. Well, Canadian wood is exported all over the world for one main reason, and that is every piece of wood passes through a test. It's a machine which stress rates this lumber, which says this piece of wood has this strength to it. So we're not just taking we take the lumber from any part of the tree, but maybe this lumber, this piece of wood, has a different strength if it came from the center of the tree than if it came from the outside. Which is fine. We can use that in part of the house where we don't need that strength. So every piece of wood in this house has a stampila, a stamp. Tells us how strong it is. Because that's how we can build those walls and that roof system so light. You see, we don't use square lumber. We call it a 2x4, which means it's half as thick as it is wide. Because the wall needs strength in one direction, but not necessarily always in the other direction.
Lemnul folosit este de conifere și este atent ales astfel încât casa dumneavoastră să fie construită la standardele pe care vi le doriți. Barele din lemn sunt amplasate la o distanță de 40 de centimetri una de cealaltă. Fiecare perete lemnos are însă și o bară metalică ce îi oferă rezistență. Pereții exteriori se izolează cu folie de aluminiu și cu spumă. Apoi se pun ferestrele și ușile. Întreaga operațiune durează în jur de 3 zile.
Can you tell me something about the structure, the trusses and...
Sure. Well, we start with a wood frame wall system around the exterior of the house. You can see over top of the windows we have large beams which will carry the roof above. Remember we said earlier in an earlier episode that all the roof weight is carried on the outside walls, so you can see how we reinforce those. You see these diagonal pieces here? These are to resist wind pressure because we build these houses where they have hurricanes, so they must resist the wind pressure. Here we are drilling a hole through the bottom of this wall to fasten it to the concrete. When we poured the concrete, if you saw our earlier episode, we left some bolts in the concrete which will hold the house, the wood structure, to the concrete. But we don't put it directly. You see what we're doing? We're energy efficient. So first of all, we put some foam strip which will come between the two and not allow any air to pass between the wood structure and the concrete foundation.
Can you tell me something about the roof structure?
Yes, the roof structure is another system in itself. We have here in Romania our own wood truss plant, and you saw at the beginning of this episode how the machine was pressing pieces of wood together with metal plates. Those trusses will sit on top of these walls without any interior support at all, which is really amazing because most people cannot believe that you can support a truss from one wall to the other, even if those walls are 20, 30 meters apart. But with our system engineered based on snow load, so we would build this house different in Brașov than we would in Constanța. We would use more diagonal braces in the roof. We would still just support on the outside walls, but we must compensate for extra load. And so that really wraps up how we frame a Canadian house. We start with the main floor walls. We have the horizontal beams carrying the étage and the second floor walls, and then we put on the wood truss system. And there you have the structure of a Canadian house.
Thank you very much, man.
You're welcome.